Hey people, ever since the release of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time on the 3DS last summer, there's been a lot of talk about the potential remake of its direct sequel, Majora's Mask. It even inspired one fan to make this really well done video of what the game might look like in HD. Nintendo confirmed it was being considered to make a 3DS remake and even tweeted about big news on the final day. This was likely a reference to the Dawn of the Final Day screen that appeared in Majora's Mask. Partly because it's my favorite Zelda game, and my second favorite game of all time, and partly because I had nothing to do today, I've decided to speak out on this matter. Speaking strictly from a business point of view, it makes sense to remake this game. It is true that Majora's Mask will probably take more time to remake than Ocarina of Time. After all, the game was so extensive that the Nintendo 64 needed an expansion pack just to play it. In other words, the remake won't be cheap. However, a remake is less expensive to make than a new game. There might be a little more programming if they want to add new features, but the only thing they'll really need to update is the graphics. And, since the N64 version of the game used the same graphics for things like items, character design, and enemies, the only graphics that need updating are the environments and some of the unique items to the game. Everything else could just use the same programming from the 3DS version of Ocarina of Time. More importantly, it will make money. Despite being released 3 times before on the Nintendo 64, GameCube, and Virtual Console, Ocarina of Time is still the 4th best-selling 3DS game to date, selling over 2.9 million copies. Majora's Mask is also the 9th best-selling N64 game of all time, with 3.36 million copies sold. With a limited production cost and all the evidence pointing to a sizable profit margin, it really seems almost stupid from a business standpoint not to do this remake. In terms of story, it's one of the very few Zelda games that doesn't feature saving Princess Zelda as the primary goal. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the games that do are somehow flawed, but it is a nice change of pace and adds some freshness and unpredictability. In fact, Majora's Mask is one of the most unique games, not only in the Zelda series, but in video games period. Several games involve time travel, but honestly, I can't think of any that utilize it in such an interesting way. While other games like Chrono Trigger and Ocarina of Time use time travel, it's always across years or even ages, not 3 days. I think the 3-day mechanic is my favorite aspect of the game. It rewards players for exploration not only in the environment, but in time as well. Knowing when things are going to happen by noticing little details, like a blue-haired kid with a Keaton's mask looking oddly similar to your own cafe's mask, and doing something about it in the next cycle is a perfect example. In a sense, it's one of the few games that encourages you to talk to everyone and develop relationships with everybody in town to know what's going on. This gives a real feeling that you are an intricate part of their world, despite being a drifter and having only 3 days with them. Also, the quirky charm of the game, underlying the sad and dark undertones of the inevitable tragic death everyone is about to experience, and yes, this is somehow marketed as a kid's game, made for an incredible experience. Even the premise, Link looking for Nave and, spoiler alert in case you've been living under a rock and don't have any golden gauntlets, never finding her and simply riding off into the forest has a sad, almost Lord of the Rings feel to it. In fact, I've always thought Majora's Mask should have a sequel about Link's continued search, but that's a whole other discussion. If a remake is done, there are a few things I'd want Nintendo to do. First, cutscenes should have a skip option. As stated before, I'm a fan of the 3-day mechanic. What I'm not a fan of is having to sit through a cutscene I've seen a dozen times by the time I'm halfway through the game. Second, and this one is more of a personal preference, but I've played through the game so many times that I know all the songs by heart. The 3DS has a D-pad, so just use that in place of the C buttons and leave A where it is. I found myself having to look up the notes every time in Ocarina of Time 3D, despite already knowing all of them on the N64. Also, as long as it doesn't affect what's already going on in the game, I wouldn't be opposed to adding some extra side quests, like more Pictobox challenges, or extra areas or achievements of some kind. Perhaps they could add a higher difficulty level like Skyward Sword's Hero Mode, or Ocarina of Time's Master Quest. Finally, and I can't stress this enough, fill in some plot holes. I'm not saying show everything, I believe a little mystery is good for the story, but at least show Kafei's face or maybe explain the Deku Butler's son. I also think the transition to 3DS might work out even better than the original N64 version. One frustrating aspect of the game is that you can only save at an owl statue or after playing the Song of Time. Being able to close the system at any time and put it into sleep mode is a very attractive feature for this game. Also, the addition of 3D might help with things like the GOT battle or the alien battle at the Romani Ranch. Overall, I think this would be a great move for Nintendo on the money side and also with their fans. With the Big N having a bad habit of focusing too much on casual titles, this would be a big victory for the hardcore base. I know I'm biased because Majora's Mask is my favorite in the series, but I think it's the right move for Nintendo. Spout off in the comments section if you agree or disagree. Of course, if you disagree, it means you hate Zelda and puppies. Stay the course, friend.